Okay, we are live. I can see that somebody said hello. Oh, I'm so glad you didn't miss me. I hope you pronounced your name right, Cher. And Teresa, hello. Hey, good to see you all. And Sarah, I didn't see you because there was a box over your name. Excellent. Hey, so my technology seems to be working. Let me see what I can do over here on my end. And I also, we have the sun setting, so I have various weird shadows. There's some light back here, so I'm trying to be flexible here around the sun, and I try to set up the lighting, but because it's moving all the time, it's really hard to know where it's going to be next. And but it is setting. It is 4 p.m. here in Northern California. And welcome, everyone. If you've been wanting to get started with sourdough but felt intimidated, or if you've tried and given up, or if you're overwhelmed with all the feedings and discards and the maintenance, then this live stream, and if you're watching the replay video, is really for you, because I'm here to tell you that sourdough can be simple, and I would love to show you how you can make it really simple. So that's what this entire stream is all about, and I'll be going through some basics and some of my best tips and tricks, and then at the end I'm going to take some live questions. I get so many questions about my sourdough videos. I have two main videos, one how to make a sourdough starter and one how to maintain your sourdough starter. And probably the most questions I get on my channel here is about sourdough, anything, everything sourdough. And so that is probably one of my specialties. And if you're new here to the stream, or if you're watching the replay, my name is Anya. I'm here at our Gabled home in my kitchen where I record most of my videos. And I love sharing simple heritage homemaking and homesteading and a lot of recipes. So who am I talking about sourdough? If you've been following me for a while, you might know that I was born and raised to German parents in Germany. And I think ever since I can remember, we had sourdough bread in our home. My mom learned to make sourdough bread from my grandmother, who learned it from her grandmother and great-grandmother. And so it's really been in our family for a long time. And I don't actually remember my mom ever starting sourdough, because that's the bread that she baked. And I'm going to show you the bread really quick here because I have it with me. So let me see if I can hold it in the camera. Give me a moment to see if, oh yeah, okay. Can you see the bread? This is the German sourdough bread that I grew up on. It's fantastic. I have a video, and I'll link all the videos that I'm mentioning down below. So oftentimes she would ask me when I was older, hey, can you move the dough from the bowl to the loaf pan, or can you do this, or can you do that? So I want to say that I actually naturally grew up with sourdough. I never officially learned how to make it, and I just got a feel for it. And here is the other sourdough bread. I just wanted to show you that. This is another one that I bake. I have another recipe. This is more of an artisan style, no knead sourdough bread, a little lighter. I actually just took that out of the freezer before this live stream to show you guys what I have. So let me know in the chat, are you new to sourdough? Have you wanted to start and haven't because you felt intimidated? Or are you new to sourdough and have baked a few things? Or are you really seasoned and they're like, I've baked so many sourdough breads, I don't really know why I'm here. So let me know in the chats. Let's see what coming through. People love the bread. Yes. Dehydrated, powder it. I will ask those questions later. I'm sorry, I will answer those questions later. Is there a sourdough muffin recipe without baking powder? Yeah, I will bring so many more sourdough recipes to my channel. And I'm also going to bring you a video in which you'll learn how you can convert any recipe that you have to sourdough, how that works and when that works. So that's on my list for videos for 2022. So stay tuned for that. You're new to sourdough. Claire, nice. All right. New to sourdough, black tie 360. Excellent. Welcome. You're going to have so much fun. This is really for you. And I'm here to tell you that sourdough is so easy once you get comfortable with it. And this is all I do today. Tell you how to get comfortable with sourdough. New to sourdough. Great. You guys are connecting in my chat. I love it. I love it. All right. I have one older video. It's actually one of my first videos I uploaded on my channel that is about how to make a sourdough starter. And sometimes I want to say I'm a little embarrassed about that video because it is older and I was a little stiffer in front of the camera and it's also lower quality. But in reality, when I rewatched the video lately, the content is still current and it's still really what I do every time I actually make a sourdough starter, which is not too often these days. Let me just walk you through the process really quick to get you up to speed. If you want to get more information, there's a link for this video in the box below this video so you can watch it later so you don't need to take any notes. And by the way, I also have a sourdough starter here. This is my whole grain sourdough starter. Basically what I do is I take a jar like this, I add some flour, and it doesn't matter if it's all-purpose, bread flour, pastry flour, rye flour actually works really well. And I put in this jar maybe half a cup or a cup of flour. And then I add some buttermilk. This is why my method is a little bit different than a lot of methods that you will see out there, but I'm going to be talking about that. So then I also add some caraway seeds. And before you're going to hit me up in the chat and say, but why the caraway seeds? My mom told me to. I'm a good girl. I'm doing what my mom told me to. But also it really works. The funny thing is I can't tell you exactly why it works. But if you don't like caraway at all, if you don't like the taste at all, and I know it can be either people hate it or they love it, then you can totally make the sourdough starter without caraway seeds, but there's something about the caraway seeds that speeds up the formation of the sourdough starter. So you mix it up in a ratio where you get a thick, runny batter, almost like a thick pancake batter. You stir it up. And here's a question that I often get is, do you cover it tightly or do you let it sit out there? So this one here is tightly covered because I just got it out of the fridge. But for the sourdough starter in the making, I just put something over it to keep critters out, like fruit flies or anything else that you might have in your kitchen. Yes, Sister Bonner, you can use spelt flour. You can really use any flour, spelt, einkorn, wheat, rye. It has to have gluten. It's a different method if you're trying to make a gluten-free starter, so that would be different. And then you let it sit until it's ripe. And that's really all it is. That is how I learned how to make a sourdough starter. Now, I'm not saying that all the methods where you measure the water and the flour and you let it sit and then you take some off and you add the same ratio of flour and water back to it and you do it for so many days. I'm not saying that that method doesn't work. I'm just telling you that my method is a little bit different and it's so easy. So that might take 5 days or 7 days until it's all done. And what I want to hear right now from you in the Chat is, have you named your sourdough starter? And if you have named your sourdough starter, what have you named it? So let's see if somebody has a name for their sourdough starter. Okay. Oh, Murray, somebody said you have your son. Murray, that's cute. I love that. That's awesome. Anybody else? Let's see in the chats. Anybody else? Ozzy, is that how you say it? Ozzy? That's cute. That's very cute. Let's see. Teresa, Ozzy. Love. Anita. Oh, I love it. I love love. You gotta love love, right? Anybody else? So I was thinking, I haven't named my sourdough starter, but I was thinking if I were to name my sourdough starter, I'd probably name it Bubbles. So anyways, let's see. Okay, so then you have your sourdough starter. How do you know it's ripe? I like to look at it. It has a lot of bubbles. It's very active. Oh, somebody's watching from the Netherlands. Reeks grown. Welcome. Awesome. I love it. And there's somebody who has a sourdough starter named George. That's awesome. So how do you know your sourdough starter is ripe? You look at it. It has lots of bubbles. It smells pleasantly sour, not vinegary, but pleasantly sour. I like to tap on it. And if it sounds hollow, this one doesn't because it's not an active sourdough starter. It sounds hollow. And, you know, if you wanted to, you can taste it. It's not going to do anything. Obviously, it's healthy. And you can also do a float test in which you take a little bit of your sourdough starter and drop it in a glass of water. And the rule of thumb is if it floats, it's ready. And if it sinks, it's not. So you just let it sit a little bit longer. I want to quickly go into the gist of my second video, the sourdough maintenance, and then I'm going to go a little bit more into detail about the method and the maintenance and all of that. Tessa says she made a starter this week, baked the bread today. Disappointed did not rise or didn't have any oven spring. Okay, so we'll talk about that, and if I forget your question and I'll be asking later for more questions, please remember to ask me that question again because I'm going to give you some tips how you can get that going better next time. So once you have your sourdough starter, and I'm dropping here some on my table, what you will do is you take some off and put that in a jar. And then you add a lot of flour. And when I say a lot of flour, and you can watch me do that in my sourdough maintenance without feedings or discards video, link is below. You add so much flour that it's almost like you can't add any more. And then some more, so there's some flour on top, and I can show you this here in the camera. I hope that you can see. Oops, there's some coming out. So there's flour on top of my sourdough starter. And then I use these clip top jars and place this in the refrigerator, and that's all I need to do. And then it's good to go. I can keep it in there for a week. I can keep it in there for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Anytime I've used it after 6 weeks of not looking at it, it just lived in the back of the refrigerator and it was still good. So that's really the gist of the maintenance. And then once you want to bake, you take it out the night before you want to bake. You add some lukewarm water. You stir it up with a fork. And there's a funny comment in my sourdough no maintenance video where somebody says, oh my gosh, it looks like she's going to break the fork. Yes, I know. So you stir it up and you want to mix up the water and reactivate it. You keep it out on the counter or anywhere room temperature to reactivate your starter. And then the next morning it's good to bake. And that is just a sort of repeat that cycle. So then you bake, you take a little bit of the starter off, put that back in the jar, add a lot of flour in the fridge until your next baking. Night before you take out the sourdough starter, add some warm water and leave it out on the counter for the next morning. It's really all that simple. So, okay, what about all these recipes with measurements and instructions? And I want to say that those recipes are just a different way of approaching it. And that is for people who have never done a sourdough starter or who want really specific instructions, because that is almost foolproof and you just follow the method and it should give you the good result. But I feel like this method is just as good. And what I'm always doing, and this is what I'm going to tell you over and over in this live stream today, is that you want to develop a feel for your sourdough starter. It's almost like you're creating a relationship with your sourdough starter. And once you make a sourdough starter and you feel like, oh my gosh, I failed, it didn't turn out well, it got moldy, I'll talk about that too, or my bread didn't rise, don't let that discourage you. Take that as a lesson from which you learned and do it again and develop that feel. So what was different this time? And just feel free to experiment. There's so many different methods that not one method is the right method. And if you see a recipe that has a bunch of instructions and you don't like it, then find another recipe or check out mine. And I know that some people don't like my method, and that's fine, but a lot of people tell me that they love the simplicity of my methods and my recipe. So sourdough is alive and it is a living thing. It's almost like a pet. And that is why it reacts to its environment or the variables in your home. So if you make a sourdough starter, it will be different when you make that in the summer versus when you make it in the winter. It depends on the humidity in your home. It depends on the native wild yeasts. There are some wild yeasts that live on the flour and, everywhere, all around us. And then there are some in the air. So it really depends on that. And here's one little thing that I found. Once you make a really good sourdough starter in your kitchen, all the other sourdoughs will come out really nice. If you've never made a sourdough starter in your kitchen before, it might take a while. So it's almost like whatever lives in your kitchen knows, oh yeah, okay, if that makes sense. But regardless, if you have never made a sourdough starter before, it might be a little bit more challenging and might be a little bit more coaxing. If you've made one before, you probably have the right yeasts in your kitchen to make it a little bit easier. So one of the questions, and I wanted to show you my other sourdough starter. So I have two sourdough starters. I have a whole wheat sourdough starter and I have a white sourdough starter. And why do I have two different ones? Because when I bake this bread, I use my whole grain sourdough starter. And when I bake this lighter bread, more like a sandwich type bread, I use the white sourdough starter. So I actually have two. That's the first time in my life that I've had two starters, and they're with me here today. A question I get a lot is, why do you use buttermilk when you make your sourdough starter? So first off, I want to say you can absolutely make a sourdough starter with just water and flour. There's nothing wrong with that. I find it's easier. And why? Because buttermilk contains live active cultures, but it has to be cultured buttermilk. People often ask me, what about buttermilk that you make with milk and then you put some vinegar or lemon juice in it? That is a different thing. That is curdling, but it's not culturing. So you want to use a buttermilk that is cultured. And when you look at the ingredients, it says live active cultures, and it sometimes even gives you the specific ones. You can also use yogurt. You can use kefir. I think I've heard that people have used kombucha. So you want those live active cultures that are jump starting your sourdough starter. And again, if you don't have it, if you can't find those ingredients, or if you're lactose intolerant, you can also make a sourdough starter with just water and flour, but then the method is slightly different. And people are like asking me, oh, I've made a sourdough starter 5 days ago and nothing is happening. So that can have a few reasons. It may be too cold. And again, it may be the first time that you're making one. It gets easier every time you make one. And you may not be stirring it enough. That is another reason that some people get mold, which I will talk about in just a moment. Oh, hello, Barbara from Florida. Thank you so much for being here. It's awesome to see you. So Tessa says she doesn't eat dairy. So that's fine. You can probably experiment with kombucha with like one that doesn't have a strong flavoring, just a very basic plain one. Or you could use whey. I don't know if whey still has lactose in it. I'm not sure about that. So why do people get mold on their sourdough starter? That is one of the many questions that are very repetitive, and I get asked all the time, why do I get mold on my sourdough starter? Well, first of all, mold is not necessarily bad. If you just have a little bit at the top, I recommend that you generously scrape it off and then proceed with your starter. If there's a lot of mold on your sourdough starter, I would just err on the side of caution and toss it out and start anew. So some of the reasons are your jar, whatever you're using, or your container isn't clean enough. And by clean enough, I also mean if you have soap residue on it, that can also mess with your sourdough starter and lead to mold. Chlorine is what your water district puts in your tap water to kill off certain bacteria, and the lactobacillus acid, am I saying this right? Well, the lactobacillus and the yeasts in your sourdough starter are essentially bacteria that the chlorine is supposed to kill. That's why I recommend using distilled water or filtered water, but not the chlorinated water from your tap. If your hands or your utensils are not exactly clean, that can also lead to mold. And one thing you want to do is once you get your starter mixed up and you have it in your kitchen, you want to stir it every single day, because the good bacteria in your sourdough starter will outcompete the bad ones. So you want to mix them in so that they have a chance to outcompete them and they don't live on the top where they form mold. So you stir it every day until it's done. The next question I often get is, do you need to keep your sourdough starter covered? And I talked about that briefly earlier. Yes, just any light cover. Some people use a paper towel or a beeswax wrap. That's what I love to do, and I have a couple of videos how you can make your own beeswax wraps. I use them all the time. You could use a lid, and you don't want to necessarily tighten it all the way, but I've heard this way and that way, so I would tell you, experiment, see what works. I have had really good success with a very loose covering on the sourdough starter. I have, in my original video, I keep it in the windowsill, and somebody asked me, is there a reason you keep it in the windowsill? No, not exactly. I keep it in the windowsill so that it's kind of out of the way. It doesn't get tipped over when people are in the kitchen doing things. And it's also warm because the sun hits the window. And I guess it's also further away from other ferments, which I am trying to observe that, let's say I have some sauerkraut going and some kefir, that I have a couple of feet at least, or 3 feet between those various ferments, so they're not competing with each other and influencing each other. And moving on to sourdough baking and my bread recipes, I like to add salt to my bread recipes or to my bread dough, and that serves 2 purposes. One is for flavor, and the other one is to keep the sourness in check. If you like your sourdough bread to be very sour, you can let it rise, ferment a longer time and use a little less salt. And if you like your sourdough bread not so much on the sour side, then you would add a little bit more salt and a little bit less rising time. I'm just looking at some questions here. Can I use the contents of a powdered probiotic capsule instead of buttermilk? You know, that is a really good question, and my gut tells me yes, but I haven't tried it, so I would encourage you to try it and circle back to me and let me know how that turned out. I also get another comment, and that is for this sourdough bread, I add yeast and malted barley to it. And some people are telling me, well, then it's not a true sourdough bread because you're adding yeast. And yes, I mean, it kind of depends on your own philosophy and where you come from, but the sourdough actually contains yeast. It's part of the sourdough bacteria, if you will. And the way sourdough starter was developed, okay, I need to back up. That didn't come out right. The way yeast was developed was that it was isolated out of the sourdough, and it made it easier and more reliable. And that happened maybe 150 years ago. And then people needed shorter rising times, and they didn't need to, to keep the sourdough starter. But yeast is part of sourdough. And by adding yeast, you can shorten the rising time, the fermentation time. You can also get a reliable bread like this. And even beginners who've never baked with sourdough feel very successful baking a sourdough bread by adding just a little bit of yeast. And the malted barley is essentially a little bit like a steroid for your yeasts, so it rises better. And a lot of commercial bakers add malted flour to all their bread recipes. Can you teach us about water kefir in the future? Yes, I can, and I will, because I love that. I laughed when you start waving your fingers because those I know, right? All right. So, hey, if you're enjoying all this information, I would love it if you hit the like button. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to my channel. Also, if you have been following for a while and you enjoy my content, there is a super chat function, and that is a way you could support my small channel if you felt called to do so. Somebody says, Sister Bonner says, I would use a prebiotic instead of a probiotic. Okay, well, I would love it if in this community we try and experiment and leave comments so we can all learn. I certainly love to learn, even though I feel like I've baked a long time. There's always something new and always something that I didn't know before. Is it okay to switch flours? Trina, yes, no, you can absolutely. That's what I do all the time. When I announced this live stream, I said, if you can't make it, send me your questions beforehand and I will answer them in this live stream. And if you're watching the replay, you can hear what I have to say. So I want to do that here. Shirley asked me, I always see the very rustic bread made from a sourdough starter. I'm wondering if there's also a recipe for a softer sourdough sandwich type of bread. Yes. As you will see, this one, and it's been cut into and eaten. This one was actually a round loaf that I made in my big cast iron Dutch oven. If you use a loaf pan, that will give you a softer sourdough bread because the sides will stay moist and not become this hard crust that is on top. You also can add a lot more yeast to make it fluffier and use a lower temperature and bake it just a little bit longer. That will make it a little bit softer, and sprinkle more water on top of it. Then Tessa asked me 3 questions. Where are they? Is it okay to only use hard red wheat berries as a starter? Do I need to mix it with bread flour or any other types of wheat berries? As I was telling Trina, no, you don't. You can switch it up. And the hard red wheat is just one type of wheat. And I personally have never felt that I need to stick to a certain type of flour or wheat that gives me better results than another. It is a living thing, so you might get wheat from a crop that has more bacteria, the good bacteria on top, and the yeasts that you want to cultivate, capture and cultivate. So you never really know what you get. And it's like a produce. It differs from harvest to harvest and from producer to producer. And I would just say, if you love it and you bake with it, sometimes you need to add a little bit more water, or, you know, watch for the softness. And that's why I'm saying you need to get a feel for it and get away from it has to be this way and you have to use this many grams of that. Just look at it and say, oh yeah, that looks good. And if you bake a bread and it didn't come out fine, then you realize, oh, maybe I didn't use enough water. And then next time you do, and then you'll also feel a little bit more successful and confident in experimenting in the future. She also asked me if the float test really matters to determine if the starter is ready. She's been feeding her starter for 8 days and it still doesn't float to the top when she drops a small spoonful in cool water, but it has bubbles and it is rising in the jar and smells cheesy. Well, I hope it's a good cheese. Oh, Elaine loves my kitchen. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you. Thank you for joining me in my kitchen. I love being here too. When we first we remodeled this kitchen, when we first put it together and it was really usable, I told my husband, you know what, I actually want to sleep in here. Okay, does the flow test really matter? Not so much. It's just one way to determine if your sourdough starter is ready. If it smells good, if it, you know, you taste it, it tastes good, it looks good, you do the tap test and it sounds good, then I would say go ahead and bake with it. And here's my little baker's pro tip secret. If you're not quite sure about your sourdough starter, just add some yeast anyways. And then the next bread will for sure be good. The yeast will always help it rise. So you always get a good bread. And who was that? Was that Tessa asking earlier, her bread didn't rise? And I would say next time use the same recipe, but just add a little bit of yeast and see if that makes a difference. Then you can slowly decrease the amount of yeast. And for a big bread like this, I would add maybe no more than a teaspoon of yeast, maybe even less than that. And that really is your insurance that your bread will rise if you don't trust your sourdough starter. And she had one more question. Any tips or tricks? I've talked too much. Any tips or tricks on getting good oven spring rise for the dough? Yes. Okay. So I just said that, just add a little bit of yeast, and you can also sprinkle some water on it, or add a oven-proof, heat-proof dish to the bottom of your oven and put a lot of water in it. That will also create steam in there and keep the crust from getting too hard too soon, so your bread underneath can rise better. Okay. Somebody else asked, where did it go? It may be a silly question, but wouldn't the dairy in the buttermilk or yogurt in the starter go bad at room temperature after a few hours or days? That's a very good question. And when I read that, I thought, yeah, I wonder myself. I have made various sourdough starters over my lifetime, and I've never had the buttermilk or the yogurt, I use buttermilk usually, go bad when I make a sourdough starter. So my experience is no, but it's probably because the bacteria that are developing in the sourdough starter are out competing the bad bacteria, that mold bacteria that we don't want. Okay, Bruce 898. Hi, Anya. Hey, back there. So let me know in the chat box if you have more questions. Also, give me a thumbs up if you're enjoying your time here in my kitchen. It's getting a little darker outside. I know it's almost, 4:30 in the afternoon. Let me know what questions you have about sourdough. I want everybody to feel successful, and I love sourdough so much, and I love nothing more than for you to love it as much and to come back to me and tell me, hey, it worked, it was so great. And that really that really means so much to me when I read these comments on my videos, when people say, this is the best method ever, and I wish I had known this sooner. Never thought of adding yeast. Yeah, why not? I mean, that's how I am. I experiment, and when it works, I'm like, that worked. And I'm telling you, professional bakers do that too. There's the purists that will, again, do that finger and say, no, that's not a true sourdough bread. But there's a lot of bakers who add just a little bit of yeast to it. And remember, yeast is just a part of the sourdough culture. So, any other questions you have for me? Do you feel a little bit more confident now with this knowledge? Do you feel like you're ready to get started? You can't wait to go into your kitchen and make your sourdough starter? Oh, thank you, Tessa. Great life. Fleshy milk, grain berries. Yes, it's so rewarding. It's almost primal to mill your own grains, and the fresh milled flour is not only so much healthier because it hasn't oxidized, it hasn't lost any nutrients in the transportation and shipping and storing in the store, and who knows at what temperatures it's been stored. And to bake a bread and to cut a slice of bread and put some butter on it, and I mean, it's the best, isn't it? Black Tie 360 has trouble keeping his kitchen warm enough. Any tips? I have my sourdough starters going, so they're good to go, and I don't need to babysit them in that way. But I do make a kefir that needs more warmth than our kitchen has, and our kitchen doesn't have a heater. It gets all the heat from the house or when the oven is going. I actually take my kefir and move it closer to one of the heater vents in our dining room. So that's what I would say. If your kitchen is too cold for your sourdough starter, just move it to another spot in the house where it's warmer. And you can also put it in your oven and turn on the oven light. Oftentimes that will create just enough temperature for your sourdough so that it likes it and becomes active. Claire, thank you. Yes, we watched the video. It will come out next Tuesday, the 23rd of November. Barbara needs to revive her starter. It's been neglected. That's okay. Just give it some love. It will come right back. And remember to add some yeast if you're not quite sure. You can totally do this. Tessa feels liberated. Oh, thank you. Yes, I hope that, because I feel like I can do whatever I want with my sourdough starter and my sourdough recipes, and it always comes out nice. And I want for every one of you to feel the same way, that it's something that you feel confident and that you don't feel like it's complicated and you need measurements and recipes and it all has to be super exact. My recipes are never super exact. They're always a little bit more on the eyeballing side. All right. I do have an entire sourdough playlist that I'm also linking in the box below this video. It has sourdough questions and answers that I did some time ago, and it has a bunch of sourdough recipes. And I will be adding more recipes to this sourdough playlist and to my channel, so please be sure to come back and watch those recipes. Share been keeping warm our house is Victorian. Yes, this one is too, actually. We have radiant heat in a dish rack on top of the radiator. Perfect. Perfect. Just wherever it's just slightly warmer in the house. Oh, Trina, I love it. Thank you. I'm glad that you find this helpful, because this is what I'm all about. I love helping you guys and feel confident and successful in your kitchen. Okay, any last questions? Yes, you love more generation. Yes, exactly, Mason. That's all about sharing, and I feel like there's so much knowledge, and some of the knowledge has been, I don't want to say exactly lost, but the industry also wants to keep us thinking that things are difficult and hard and not rewarding enough. So we buy pre-made products and processed foods. And no, there's so much generational wisdom, and I love to bring it all back and help revive and maintain all this wisdom. Freshly milled berries. Yes, Tessa, I would have to actually get some of those berries, wheat berries myself, to experiment with them a little bit, because I have a source where I get my grains from, and I'm not exactly sure what they are because it hasn't really mattered to me before. But I will try to get some red hard wheat berries and experiment with that. Also, if you have a really good grain mill, I am going to tell you that I absolutely love my grain mill. It's a mock mill. It's a very good company. The grain mills are all designed and manufactured in Germany. I will leave a link in this the box below this video, because I'm offering you 5% on these mills, because I believe in them so much that I want everybody to have one at the best price possible. So it could also be that if you're using a steel grinding mechanism, that it has a harder time. Maybe it gums up your grinding mechanism too much. And the mock mills have, I used to say it's a stone grinding mechanism, but it's also ceramic, but it works the same way. It resharpens itself. So that can be one of the reasons, one of the possibilities why you're not getting the results that you're looking for. Yes, so many of us lost that generational wisdom. Yes. Well, I'm here to help bring it back. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of other bloggers, YouTubers, creators in this homesteading, homemaking community who love to bring this wisdom back, so that it's here to stay. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for being here. I absolutely loved it. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Share milled, your price is so much better than Amazon. Thank you. Give me a thumbs up, and also let me know either quickly in the chat or in the comments when this video goes on my channel, if there's any other content or type of video you would like me to bring to this channel. I love to serve you. I love to bring content that you enjoy and that you need and that meets your needs. So definitely let me know what kind of content you love for me to make and make videos on and produce. Yes, Claire. Excellent. Barbara, thank you. Thank you everybody so much for joining me here. And I look forward to seeing you in my next video, in my next live stream. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful rest of your weekend. Bye-bye, everybody.